Hello, everybody, and welcome to another cryptocurrency interview. This one's going to be a little bit different than the other ones we've done. Today, I'm going to be talking with Alex Gladstein, and he is going to be the previous guests have mostly talked about specific technological issues, like actual technology of cryptocurrency, but they weren't really experts in sort of how you might use it or what we might want it to do. So assuming we can achieve like the technological goals of it, or assuming that it could do whatever we want it even, what do we need it to do? What are some real use cases that aren't just about financial speculation and that sort of thing? Without further ado, here we go. Welcome to the program. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let me just start out, because a lot of people who are watching these streams don't necessarily have a lot of background in who the people in crypto are right now, what they do. Could you give us a little background on why you got interested in this, and sort of what you do is actually very interesting. Could you tell them why what you do and cryptocurrency are related, because that might also not be something they're familiar with?
Sure. So I've been working for a nonprofit called the Human Rights Foundation since 2007. The Human Rights Foundation is a civil liberties organization based in New York that was founded by a Venezuelan and is chaired by a Russian, and is run by our president is Lebanese and our chief legal officer is Guatemalan. We're an international organization that seeks to promote freedoms where they're most at risk. So we actually look from a political science point of view at authoritarian countries that don't have a Supreme Court, that don't have free press, that don't have the ability to just go march in the street for whatever you want, or even to create an Amnesty International or Greenpeace in your country. There's about 95 countries spanning 53% of the world population, about 4.3 billion people, where those things are not possible, where people live under either a fully or a partially authoritarian regime. Now, that's my background. So I spent about 10 years helping dissidents, activists, supporting different freedom movements, helping get information into difficult places like North Korea and Cuba. And then I started to get into Bitcoin. And it took a little while. Like, I was first introduced to it by some Ukrainians in 2013, but I was very skeptical. I was like, nah, I don't know about this thing. So we started accepting it for donations the next year, 2014, which has been great for us. It's been really, I think it's very important for nonprofits to take Bitcoin and to have a Bitcoin strategy. Really pays off in the long term. But I didn't personally start to grasp the like why it mattered for human rights until about 2017, early 2017. I started to really start putting things together. And for the last 5 years, I've just been like sort of obsessed about why aren't we talking more about money and currency when we talk about human rights? Like, why is it left out? Anytime now that I ask a human rights activist that is part of our work, or at one of our Oslo Freedom Forum conferences, anytime I ask them about money, they always have amazing stories, like whether it's North Koreans or Eritreans or Nigerians or Sudanese or Venezuelans or Belarusians, or like, everybody's got issues. And the big lesson here is that for most people in the world, money's really broken. For most people, I'm American. I'm like tremendously privileged. Like, not only is my currency stable relatively, now we have 6% CPI, so we can get into that.
Sure,
but like,
sure, yes.
Relatively speaking, I have the hardest money on earth in terms of fiat money as my native currency. I have the dollar. I have the almighty dollar that I've been born into. I have Venmo. I have PayPal. I can invest in the S&P. I can have a 401k. I can buy real estate. It's relatively easy for me to take out a loan. That is absurdly privileged in this world. Most people save in something like sheet metal or cows, like numerically on this planet. They don't have the S&P. Their local currency sucks. There's 1.6 billion people who live under a currency that has double or triple or quadruple digit inflation. And I'm not talking asset inflation. I'm talking CPI. So we're talking countries that have 20, 25% food inflation. So you go out and you buy a lamb for your Easter in Ethiopia one year. 2 years later, it's twice as expensive. I mean, that's just kind of what people are dealing with all over the world. So the first thing to understand is that their money sucks and it's broken. So Bitcoin, as we've been looking at it over the last decade, I mean, it's going the other way. Like, all these fiat currencies are depreciating. Like, you lose purchasing power over time. Some of them, like the euro and the dollar, uh, you don't lose it as fast. It's slower. But all fiat currencies go to zero over time, like that's the direction they go. They don't go up usually. Bitcoin, is volatile, but it's going in a particular direction. Like it's going up in value. Like it doesn't just store your value, it actually appreciates your purchasing power. A good example would be like when the PS3 came out, it took like many, many Bitcoins to buy a PS3. When the PS4 came out, it took like way less than one Bitcoin to buy a PS3. When the PS5 came out, it took like a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin to buy one. And it's gonna continue. When the PS6 comes out, it's gonna be like a dust amount, right? So your Bitcoin, when you like store your time and energy in it, whether you're in Egypt or Argentina or wherever you are, regardless of how rocky the financial seas are around you, this is something that you can put your time and energy into and actually secure and be your own bank. And it can actually like appreciate your purchasing power over time. So for most people, the primary use case for Bitcoin is digital gold, a savings instrument that is basically confiscation resistant and that you can do and operate without the government being involved. And remember, when I say without the government being involved, most Americans are like, oh, that sounds criminal. But no. For most people, again, they live under authoritarian regimes. And to do something without government approval is actually noble. And we would call it human rights activism. So we just need to have some context there. The second primary use case for something like Bitcoin would be as basically a payment rail. So like a lot of people live in countries where not just the money's broken, but the entire financial system. Like they don't have an easy way of sending money to their family in the United States. Like Western Union is like this vampiric parasitical company that charges like 8% to send $200 to sub-Saharan Africa from France or from Texas or something like that. And it gets reviewed. It could take all this time. Screw that. We can just do Bitcoin now, phone to phone, peer to peer. We can send it with the Lightning Network in literally a second. I've sent from, I was in Boston this summer doing a research piece on why are Palestinians using Bitcoin. I was interviewing somebody in Ramallah. I sent them $5 on the Lightning Network from Boston to Ramallah in a second with no fees instantly. I mean, this is like a revolution for people who are otherwise cut off, especially for people who are living in Cuba or Iran or places that have sanctions that they didn't deserve, that their rulers, that are aimed at their rulers. So it's not just digital gold; it's also digital cash. It's this idea of like a payment network that is unstoppable, and is just more elegant and better. Like, I mean, when I went down to El Salvador, I went to this El Zonte, the place that kind of sparked the Bitcoin revolution there, and it's this little seaside village with no paved roads, but everybody's got a phone. There's 1.5 cell phones per person in that country. 66% of that country uses social media. Anyone who uses social media can use Bitcoin. So I'm going around this town and I'm like, these are like shacks, like with like tin roofs and stuff. And I'm using Lightning Network to buy everything. And it's like way better than using the old system. I went to an ATM and I withdrew dollars out of my Bitcoin through a Bitcoin ATM. Like I didn't have to like inform my bank before I went. Like once you start using Bitcoin, you start realizing what a dinosaur system the old system is, how slow, how corrupt, how like bureaucratic, red tape. Like, I mean, Palestinians, I was talking to a guy that lives in Switzerland. Every time he sends money back to his family, it gets reviewed by the authorities, and they can arbitrarily steal it if they want, if they feel like he's disrupting security. So what Bitcoin does is it flips the power dynamic in the same way that public key cryptography flipped the power dynamic of secrecy and allowed individuals to be able to communicate privately without the military knowing, in a way that had previously just been dominated by the military. Bitcoin now flips money, and it gives us, the people, the ability to use money without the authorities. And for most people in this world, there couldn't be a more powerful revolution. So that's why I'm in it. That's why I'm passionate about Bitcoin.
So I think based on everything you just said, I think, although I'll kind of go through them one at a time, I think my questions are all basically going to revolve around the same fundamental problem I have, or rather concern I have with all of that, which is that I'm not sure how many of those things are actually things that are true in general of something like Bitcoin versus how many of them are true simply because it is new. And just to sort of explain what I mean by that, uh, if you look at something like a modern bank transfer, while there are some reasons why those bank transfers are, like, I think you used the term dinosaur, while there are some very good reasons why they are dinosaur-ish because of the incompetence of banks in general, there are also a number of reasons that have to do with the fact that there's been a long history of that kind of banking, and the government has applied tremendous amount of pressure over the past 50, 100 years to ensure that banks are constrained in lots of ways that Bitcoin does not yet have to deal with. That's just one example. So as we kind of go over these, just to give you sort of the overall theme, I think, of what I'd mostly be asking is, what makes us think that Bitcoin won't end up the same way? Right? And I can be more specific about it, but that's a lot of why I don't, for example, share the same enthusiasm you do. While I want all the things you just said are exactly things that I think, meaning I have friends in very similar positions, and I know the kinds of stuff they have to go through that we don't have to go through because we have a stable currency and people aren't seeing what we ordered online and seeing whether they want to tax that or seeing whether they want to confiscate it. I mean, I've heard all of these sorts of things as well. But I just don't know, is Bitcoin actually in some way going to be able to prevent this from becoming true of it as well? Does that initial concern make any sense to you, where I'm coming from?
Yeah. And I think to unpack it, we have to know that, or we have to start to open our mind to the idea that Bitcoin is not just a technology, that it's a new money. And the reason why banks have been so regulated is because the money that they use, like your value that goes into your deposit account, is a creation of either the bank or the state, right? Is like, this is a sort of a chartalist view on money. It's like money is created, right? That's very different from the commodity view of money, which is like something we had under, like, let's say the gold standard, right? Or at least like early gold standard would be, it's actually just a bearer asset that has the value and I've moved it from you to me, right?
Yeah.
So Bitcoin is a commodity money. It is nobody's liability, right? So what a lot of the restrictions we talk about banks, are due to like excesses in credit money, too much lending, fractional reserve to the point where there was no reserve. Whoops, Wildcat Bank. Okay, now we just stole all your money. Rug pulls, things like this. These are all features of a credit money system, right? So, and I do think that as we go into the future, people will build on top of Bitcoin credit money systems, 100%. You can already argue it's happening now.
Well,
right?
Tether seems like the kind of thing that, while you mentioned Wildcat Bank, a lot of people have compared certain companies currently to Wildcat banks, not Bitcoin itself, but people building on top of Bitcoin, for example.
Yeah, I mean, Tether today is unrelated technologically from Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Like, if Tether died tomorrow, people would sell their Tether and go into Bitcoin. Like, it's not really relevant. However, it is important to note that Tether's value perceivably comes from a traditional banking function whereby depositors deposit dollars in Deltec Bank in the Caribbean, and Deltec Bank then issues Tethers. I mean, that's ostensibly the function.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, whether or not they then take that deposit
Exactly.
account, spend it on a Ferrari,
Yes.
I have no freaking idea.
Exactly.
So,
yes.
Tether could implode tomorrow, as far as I'm concerned, which would be unfortunate because actually quite a few people in Palestine and Lebanon and other countries actually use Tethers as kind of like a new euro dollar, right? So the world has a higher demand for dollars than the Fed can actually print. And as a result, organically in the 1950s, something called a euro dollar was born. And people around the world now basically mint and create dollars outside of the purview of the Fed. Stable coins are just like a new iteration of that. Dollar denominated accounts created by neobanks outside of the purview of our government. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see where that goes. But as far as Bitcoin goes, it's very important to understand that it's commodity money and not credit money. So they're going to be just sort of like, there's just different risks and different limitations when you would compare it to like a banking system. But like, I think that if anybody could take one thing away from our conversation, it's that like, we don't have to be normative or like hope, like there's tens of millions of people using Bitcoin in emerging markets right now, and they don't care what we say on this chat. Like, they're using Bitcoin. They're using it to save. They're using it to transact. They're using it to get around financial borders. Like, they really don't care about like what people in the West say. They're just using it, and it's like a freaking godsend for a lot of them. So,
Well, but just to jump in on
yeah,
that, though, they
yeah,
do kind of care what we say, in the sense that one of the reasons that this is stable is
mm-hmm,
because powerful players such as the United States, China, etc., who have like military might and diplomatic might and the sorts of things that create problems for people using American dollars or yuan or other
mm-hmm.
things, if they choose to make life hard for people using Bitcoin, I think it would be difficult to say that there aren't a lot of pressure points they can start exerting. So I do think they care. They don't care what we say about it on this podcast because you and I are inconsequential, I'm sure. But I think they do care what our governments do.
Right. But, okay, fine. But like, a lot of these countries, Bitcoin's already illegal or like is already highly restricted or whatever. Like, it's already a parallel system. There are game theoretical reasons. I mean, the Chinese government just kicked out all of the miners. They had
Right.
half of all the mining equipment in
Yes.
the world was located within the CCP's territory. Not anymore.
Yeah.
Mostly, I mean, there's some left, but like it's not zero, but like it's a trivial amount. That has been decentralized around the world. There are game theory reasons why the U.S. government can't just like kill Bitcoin. This is not happening. No way. First of all, there's senators in Congress who are very pro Bitcoin. There's mayors, there's governors, there's states are going to start competing over Bitcoin. That's in our democracy. It's different than the Chinese Communist Party. There isn't just like a switch they can hit. And I would say even in the CCP, it's very important to note that Bitcoin is not dead in China. There's still tons of people using Bitcoin in China, even though the world's largest police state has banned it. So it's very resilient. And governments have tried. There's video, the largest country in Africa, Nigeria. There's video from February of their Congress that basically saying we don't know what to do about Bitcoin. It's like eating our fiat currency, and it's like, yeah, because they're stealing from the people. Like the naira is a corruption mechanism that redistributes wealth from the have-nots to the haves. So of course the people are going to use something else that doesn't do that. They're going to use Bitcoin, which doesn't have monetary corruption at the base level. It doesn't have a special group of people who get special privileges. It doesn't have bailouts or Cantillon effect. So I think that the Nigerians have already figured that out. And I guess what I mean by that is like, I hope to help reveal to shed some light using a flashlight onto what is happening. But like, we're sort of powerless to stop the rise of this thing. Like and so are governments, because ultimately, and we're starting to see this already, they're realizing over time that they're going to need Bitcoin. They're going to want Bitcoin. Maybe not as the legal tender for the nation, like El Salvador opted to do, but probably as a bank reserve asset. I mean, it's just the best performing financial asset in history. So eventually the governments are going to want some. So this is the sort of the game theory here.
One question I guess I would have about what you just said is, are you suggesting, and this is at least how I read that answer, but maybe this is not what you actually meant. Are you suggesting that, for example, let's suppose the United States cracks down on Bitcoin within its own country, or ignoring a crackdown, it just falls out of favor. So people in the U.S. don't care about it, don't want to use it for some reason. Even if you're saying that's not going to happen, that's cool. But let's just hypothetically assume that it did.
Sure.
Do you think that would have any effect on places who are using it as their local currency? Or is basically what you're saying, look, even if major sort of like world powers decide that they don't want this and they get rid of it through force or through coercion or who knows what successfully over time, another country whose citizenry switched to Bitcoin and likes it and disobeys their government and uses it as their local currency can still just keep using it because they don't actually care what the dollar value is of it, or that it can't really be exchanged for dollars because the Fed has somehow prohibited that. They can just still use it as their local currency, or are you not saying that? I wanted to understand, to what extent do you think it's tied to the ability to actually get dollars, American dollars, or Chinese yuan or something out of it?
Sure.
Or could that go away and it could still just be used as local tender?
Yeah, well, we're still in a transitory phase here. I mean, look, obviously, American markets and infrastructure are very important to Bitcoin right now in terms of its dollar value.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Okay. So, if tomorrow the United States kicked out all the Bitcoin miners,
Yeah.
That would cause a decrease in price, in the dollar price, temporarily. I mean, it could be a 6 to 12 month decrease.
Yeah.
But it's not going to kill it. And all the other countries are going to benefit tremendously from getting the miners to come to their country. So there's a lot of rivalrous world game theory here.
Well, I mean something maybe a little bit more violent than that.
Okay.
So suppose they did something like declared it illegal to ever change Bitcoin to dollars.
Then we'd be living in a dictatorship, and we'd all protest our government. I mean, that's insane.
Well, we might not. I mean, maybe people. I mean, there's lots of things the American public has voted to do over time that wasn't the case, right? Like
there's 40 million people using Bitcoin in America. The idea that the government's going to make their holdings illegal, like, we would not stand for that. Not a chance. So we'll see.
Okay, well, I mean, just to be clear though, I'm asking about the hypothetical. So, like, obviously, if everyone agrees that Bitcoin,
talk about the practical. I mean, the reality is the U.S. government just approved an ETF for Bitcoin. Like, there's not we're not heading in a direction of repression. We're heading in a direction of them approving Coinbase as a public company, approving an ETF for Bitcoin. Gary Gensler, like, not barely penalizing altcoin scammers, like. Show me the money. Like, where is the U.S. government? There's 3 senators promoting Bitcoin mining in their states now. Like, I'm trying to get at where do you think this? Where is this coming from? This fear? Like, what?
Oh, it's not a fear. It's a technological question. So,
okay,
if, for example, you didn't think that the United States government was ever going to do anything negative to affect Bitcoin in that way, you wouldn't need most of the technology that actually costs in Bitcoin. For example, proof of work could be replaced with something a lot different if you believed that the major powers like the US and China.
That's a good point.
Right? And so the reason I ask these hypotheticals is because while moving to a new financial future might be good because there are things we can fix, there's an open question as, are we picking the right technologies to underpin it? And if the answers to these hypotheticals aren't, yes, we do think that we need to protect against the US government deciding to outlaw Bitcoin in some meaningful way, then we didn't need to do a bunch of the technological things that we're doing. So I do think the hypotheticals are very important. They're not really about whether we think that's a likely future. They're about why are we protecting against it if we don't.
Yeah. So Satoshi, the creator of Bitcoin, chose as their birthday April 15th, which is the day in 1933 that FDR made holding gold legal in the United States. Right. So there's the good news is Bitcoiners are ready for this. Like, whether or not like my opinion of whether I think the US is going to arrest Bitcoin holders in America, which I think is absurd, is irrelevant from the fact that there is a deep culture in Bitcoin that expects that to happen.
Definitely.
So
yes.
we are ready for that. So that's why on every January 3rd, we practice not your keys, not your coins day. We get our coins off the exchanges. We hold them in our pockets. This is how we prevent what happened to gold was killed by governments, first by centralizing. The United States basically took all the world's gold and put it in Fort Knox. And demonetized it out of the international monetary system. And then through that kind of custodial nature of gold, where through centuries, people had actually given up control of their own gold to some bank, and they'd given up custody of it to somebody else. It was very easy for FDR to go around and just take everybody's gold from the banks, yes. Right? So Bitcoin was built with that in mind, that there's 2 ways you can kill a commodity money like gold that people want in a time of inflation. One is through centralization, and the other is through paper sort of derivatives. Like, you can force the price down through paper gold, right? That's what a lot of gold bugs believe, is that the real price of gold should be $10,000 an ounce, but like shadowy forces are keeping it down through the derivatives markets.
Okay.
Well, that's not really a concern for Bitcoin because shadowy markets don't control Bitcoin. People control Bitcoin.
I see.
The U.S. government and large corporations only control a small percentage of the extant Bitcoin. Total opposite for gold, right? So Bitcoin was designed assuming the state would attack. I think that's important to know. That's why when you talk to someone like Jameson, you learn about the fact that the mining network is the way over secure. It's preposterously secure. The amount of electricity used to mine Bitcoin is the security to budget is way more than you'd expect. and like the ability for you to use math to secure your value is like super robust. So these things were all designed assuming an attack. And look, we just saw the world's largest government attack the Bitcoin network. It just happened 6 months ago, and they tried to punch it in the face and they failed. And the Bitcoin mining hash rate is almost back to where it was before. This thing's incredibly resilient. So, I mean, I'm just grateful. I guess what I'm saying is I'm grateful that the United States is still somewhat of a democracy, at least.
Sure.
And
yes.
you have like a representatives who, what you're seeing now. So, the mayor of New York, he's excited to take his Bitcoin paychecks, right? Publicity stunt. Like he thinks it's going to get him attention.
Right.
And it did. It was the most popular tweet he's had in his entire life.
Absolutely.
So, and that's what happens with Bitcoin. The guy in El Salvador, he's all of a sudden probably the only Central American leader that most Americans can actually name.
Right.
He's famous.
Yes. Right.
So Bitcoin gives you like prominence. Like it's interesting. People are interested in it.
Well,
right?
and like I know the phrase Chivo wallet now, which I mean, I don't know. I can't name a single other El Salvadorian banking
Fintech
thing at all.
exactly.
Nothing. Not even a bank. Like I can't name a
Right.
bank in El Salvador, but I've seen
and,
that, right? So that's true.
And you're seeing more of this like pay me in Bitcoin, like Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, like all these Saquon Barkley, all these people in sports are starting to say it. Athletes have their own. The reason athletes like it is once they get that ACL tear, they're done and like their industry's over.
Okay.
So they want to. I just spent a few days with a former baseball player from the MLB, and like the reason why athletes are really into Bitcoin is because it helps them plan for their future in a way that's usually difficult for them. But like I think what you're going to start seeing is normalization in politics of like basically representatives are going to demand that their representatives in Congress or Senate have a Bitcoin policy. This is super clear to me. It's already starting to happen. So by 2024, the election cycle, Bitcoin is going to be a big part of that conversation. Like not only donations to your candidate in Bitcoin, if you wish, but also like, well, are they going to be pro or anti or what? Like this is going to start to become huge in American politics. So this is good. This is like good for Bitcoin because it means it's like robust. Like it's going to be hard to ban something that's like so integral to our political system. So, I mean, let's just say, I think it's unlikely that the US like does something like you're suggesting, but we're prepared if it's going to. Like if tomorrow they literally killed Coinbase and arrested all the founders of these exchanges, we're ready to go. Like most Bitcoiners, like, they don't care. They have their own funds and they're fine. You want to actually start a police state in America and start coming house to house? Okay. Well, then we have bigger problems. Do you know what I mean? Like,
so in some sense, I guess the answer to the hypothetical is yes. You would expect that if the U.S. successfully waged some campaign against Bitcoin for reasons we don't know what they are, the answer is that yes, probably it would still be able to be used in other countries as their currency, right? Because
wouldn't change anything at all except for the dollar value.
Which presumably they don't need it to be that strong against the dollar value. I mean, maybe they do. I don't know.
No, look, if Bitcoin if Bitcoin was still worth $3 like it was in 2011, we would not be talking about Bitcoin right now.
Okay.
The reason we're talking about Bitcoin is literally because it increases in value over time. And that is intrinsically tied into why it matters as a freedom technology. Like it matters because not just because it has censorship resistant and privacy features. There are tons of coins that have that. What matters is that it's like got these gold like features where no one can change its monetary policy. And whereby it's like basically the only digital asset in the world where a small group of people can't change the rules arbitrarily. Every other digital asset can be manipulated quite easily.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're essentially saying is that actually the fact that we know that the amount of Bitcoin effectively caps out, because that's one of the designs of Bitcoin in particular, which, as you said, is not necessarily true of all kinds of cryptocurrency. That's just a choice you could or could not make, depending on, that you have the option of making when you design a coin. You can design that aspect. You're saying that in particular is a very important. So the fact that it will stop effectively it will stop being able to have anything new issued once the entire hash space has been,
kind of. Yeah. I'll clarify.
Okay.
Yes, 21 million is a powerful meme.
Yeah.
And it will become very important in the world, I think. But Satoshi could have chosen 42 million or 79 million. I mean, it doesn't really. It's even. He could have also she whoever they were. They also could have chosen um uh a fixed inflation. Like it's not necessarily that. Like I do think the hard cap's important for some reasons, but the really important thing is that it's a predictable issuance, like that
Right.
everybody knows
Right.
exactly how much inflation there's going to be next year, in 3 years, in 10 years, in 100 years. And that there isn't some shadowy group of people that can change that, like where you're not going to get rug pulled, basically. Like in every other cryptocurrency and fiat currency that exists, there is a group of people who can decide to increase the monetary supply or decrease it or mess around with the interest rates or whatever. Not happening in Bitcoin. And that's why people like me believe it has the potential to become the world reserve currency. Not for any necessarily technological reasons, but for money reasons, for monetary reasons. No one can manipulate it. And humans find great value in that because it's fair. I mean, it's the only fair currency. It's the only currency that nobody can like hack to, like, you know, if you're a billionaire in dollar terms, you can go to the Fed through proxies or the treasury and you can get them to bail out your company by printing new money.
Mm-hmm.
This is literally what happened to Jeff Bezos. Like, whatever, richest person on earth, they got money from the government. Like ridiculous, right? So that is like the system that Bitcoin is ultimately protesting, is the corruption of our money, like the corruption of the ability to create new money to bail out corporations was literally baked into the Bitcoin Genesis block. If you look at the very first block in the Bitcoin blockchain, there's reference to a newspaper article.
Yes.
And criticizes government response to the great financial crisis. So that's important to consider, that it's the strict monetary supply, which will result in Bitcoin becoming more valuable against fiat currencies, which are like inflating to infinity right now. That is its core value proposition, actually, not any of this other technological stuff. All the other technological stuff is awesome, but it's kind of like subsidiary to the fact that the monetary policy can't be changed. To me, that's everybody has their own. Bitcoin's like a mirror. You see whatever you want to see in it, but
right.
To me, that's what's most interesting.
Now, can I ask a question about, so one of the things that happens in general with something like the central bank in the United States is that they attempt to hit particular inflation targets by trying to ensure that they put as much money out as necessary to sort of artificially guide the inflation based on what they measure. Like they measure the CPI and they try to go, okay, there's too much inflation, there's too little inflation. We're going to try to control the money supply to hit particular targets so that we don't have problems with either too much deflation or too much inflation. Is what you're sort of suggesting, I just want to try and figure out, are you suggesting that in general is bad, or do you think that's still good? It's just we also want Bitcoin to serve the same sort of purpose as does gold, in that when people in the U.S. are nervous about what is happening with their central bank, or maybe they don't trust it right now, they move their money into Bitcoin. When it appears that the central bank is doing its job well, they maybe don't care and leave it in dollars. Like, do you see those systems as complementary, or are you saying you just don't think there should be the kinds of monetary policy that attempts to hit inflation rates? You should just let it do whatever it's going to do.
No, I mean, again, my opinion is, our opinion here is somewhat irrelevant to the outcome, but my observation.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just asking how you saw it because I was interested.
Yeah.
Obviously, you and I don't make these decisions, but
right. My observation is that central banking is very broken. And I think it broke very dramatically when it was removed from all of its restraints through the process of demonetizing gold. Like, I studied this quite closely, and
so that's a long time ago. So you're talking about way back, like 100 years ago.
No, I'm talking about 1971, and in the decade preceding that. I mean, basically,
so Bretton Woods.
30-second history is that the U.S. emerged from World War I as this huge creditor nation. We didn't have all of our farms and industries destroyed like Europe did.
Right.
So we were able to sell stuff to the world where everybody couldn't. So we had this massive inflow of gold. So even through the whole Depression and all this horribly tough times in America, we still had way more gold than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that got even more exaggerated during World War II when the Allies, the British Empire and the French and everybody, they tried to fight Hitler and they spent all their gold.
Yep.
So we ended up in 1949, we had 70% of the world's gold. Okay. So that gave us the ability to create the new world financial system. We said, hey, everybody, you should use dollars instead of gold. Everybody said, fine, we'll do what America says. And they only agreed because we said we would redeem the dollars for for gold at $35 per ounce.
Yep.
Okay. So the only reason all these other central banks started using dollars is because they thought they were redeemable for gold. Okay. Well, the 60s didn't go so well for us economically. We decided to invade Vietnam and it was very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnson resigned, decided to not run again in 68.
Yep.
Nixon won. Nixon decided, you know what, screw it. We're going to default on the entire world. So in 71, he pulled us off the gold standard completely, leaving all of these people with bags of dollars that weren't attached to anything anymore. It's a really crazy history that actually happened.
Yep.
So 50 years ago this summer that happened. Ever since then, financial markets have gone crazy, just absolutely crazy, unrestrained. If you look at any sort of metric of, for example, like wage earners versus capitalists, like since the 70s, like 60s, 70s, like when we went off gold, when we went off a restraint, the money that the owners of corporations make has gone exponential versus the wage earners, which has remained pretty static. The big firms, Fortune 500 firms, have gone up way in value and power than the average small firm. So this monetary policy that we've been living under that central banks create has created enormous inequalities in the world and has allowed our government to have a free lunch. Like we got the Germans and the Japanese to pay for Vietnam basically through this system.
Right.
We got other countries to pay for our fight in Iraq, like all this stuff. No other country got to do that. Only we did because everybody else saves in US debt. So I think that like this transformation of like the world's like reserve currency, essentially the primary pristine financial asset from gold to American debt, I don't think it was good for everybody. I think there were big problems with that. And I think that it would be good if that role came back to something like Bitcoin. It doesn't mean that we don't have central banks, we don't have fiat currencies. We do. It just means they are like backed by something, and that there is this scarce asset that nations have to trade with each other and settle disputes in that cannot just be created by one country. I think that's actually led to a lot of death and destruction and despair in our world. And I think that having a scarce restraint between countries at the international level will be really helpful. So that's something I'm thinking a lot about right now. But it doesn't mean that there won't be still dollars or euros or whatever. It just means that like underneath, they're backed by something as opposed to backed by nothing. And I think we could go in that direction. But that's kind of like getting very, very meta deep. That's
sure,
that's not what the average Bitcoin user is thinking about. They're just like, oh, I'm using this because like it's better than my local currency and I can send money to my family with it. Like, we're kind of getting away from the brass tacks stuff, but there is deep stuff underneath. Like there are deep reasons to believe that this thing's going to really change the world.
So let me ask a couple practical questions since you kind of set it up there with the end of your question, talking about brass tacks.
Yeah.
So some of the things that you mentioned when you were initially talking about why this is currently or could be valuable in places where the financial system is not stable. So like things that people are doing now and also things that maybe more countries could do if Bitcoin reached them successfully. And I'm wondering how much Bitcoin is actually able to do some of these things because some of them were a little bit sounded counterintuitive to me.
Okay.
So one of them is, for example, in El Salvador, my understanding is that people actually don't hold their own Bitcoin. So meaning the government holds it for them. Their wallet, they don't have the actual Bitcoin keys there. So is that an incorrect understanding?
Okay, so that would be a correct description of someone who uses Chivo and only uses Chivo.
Right.
So we don't even like Chivo is like, think about like a Cash App or Coinbase on your phone. When you buy Bitcoin on Cash App, on your little screen, all that's happening is you have an outflow from your bank account.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you have like, oh, it says you have this much Bitcoin.
Right. A number.
You don't have Bitcoin. You have a promise to pay Bitcoin from Square.
Yes.
Not until you actually withdraw, much like you would with you have a promise to pay your the money that's in your bank account. Until you actually withdraw it through an ATM, you don't actually have the money, right? So it's like similar in Bitcoin. Like that's why you need to really be withdrawing the stuff from exchanges into your own hands, which is why I've protested the Chivo wallet, because I think it's a surveillance trap. I think it's terrible for people to use. I mean, you want to go in and you want to get the free money the government's airdropping, fine, but get out of there. Bring that money under your own control. Because yes, the Chivo wallet is not Bitcoin. That's the simple way to say it. Not Bitcoin.
Yeah. So I guess
it's connected to the open Bitcoin network, which is very interesting. The Americans would never allow us to connect our bank accounts to the open Bitcoin network.
Right.
But hey, the Salvadorans are trying it, and I think they deserve credit for that. But Chivo is not Bitcoin itself.
So I guess that is exactly leads into the question that I have, which is, do you think it's realistic that people will actually, like, when we talk about moving large numbers of people over to the system, which is kind of what would be necessary in order for it to be in order for it to bring benefits to people, people have to use it. Obviously, some percentage of people have to be able to use it. And one of the things that has to then be true is those people cannot then be vulnerable to the same sorts of problems that they are vulnerable to with regular dollars. And a large sort of attack vector there is if a lot of those people are actually using systems where they don't really control their Bitcoin. Do you see that as a problem? And I think perhaps because I'm talking to you specifically, do you have a sense for how many people who are currently using Bitcoin in sort of the positive ways we've talked about are actually holding their own Bitcoin versus using some kind of a, maybe works okay today, but maybe could be shut off tomorrow kind of a service?
We should be specific. What we're really talking about here is people use Bitcoin in a non-custodial way.
Correct.
They control their own keys.
Yes.
Or people who use Bitcoin in a custodial way.
Yes.
I mean, my guess is that it's no more than 10% of all Bitcoin users who actually control their own keys.
Okay.
Maybe less than that.
Okay.
Maybe it's 5%. So, most people buy Bitcoin on an exchange, whether they live in the Middle East and it's Rain, or whether, it's in Asia, it's Huobi, or it's in America and it's Square, or whether it's in El Salvador and it's Chivo. And they trust that company, and they kind of maybe they buy some, they forget about it. Maybe they do some trading. That's like the average user, right? But like, there is an educational journey here where, like, when you start learning more, you're like, wait a second, I should get that thing off of there. And over time, more and more people become custodians of their own wealth. Like happens over time, but it's a journey. It takes time. And I don't think you can like force this to happen. I think it's organic. And I think what's kind of interesting is that we have the situation where today, at least in a country like ours, Bitcoin operates under something called Gresham's law. This is an economic law that states that the bad money drives out the good, meaning I want to save the Bitcoin. Why would I want to spend it? I know it's going to increase in value. I'll spend the dollars, right? That's like what most people think today, right? If you have that luxury, that's what you want to do, basically. You want to be spending your fiat. You want to be taking a 30-year loan out in dollars from the government for a house, and you want to be saving in Bitcoin. That's like the power move, right? But, what's going to eventually end up happening is like you're seeing this pay me in Bitcoin thing start to like bubble up. Oh, all these famous people want to get paid in Bitcoin. Huh. Okay. Well, eventually what's going to happen is like your merchant down the street, your coffee shop is also going to want to get paid in Bitcoin eventually. And they're going to say, we'll even offer a discount. You pay me in Bitcoin, you get 10% off. Things like that are going to start to happen over the next decade. It's already starting to happen with high-end real estate and obviously goods and services from like athletes, things like that. It's going to start with like weird pockets of the population, but over time, especially as the US government, my government, continues to pursue this inflationary policy, which I don't frankly see how it can, how can it not? Like you're going to see the dollar just start to lose more and more value over time against other things, goods and services, and especially against Bitcoin. And I just think like people are going to want that option. So that will force the usage, literally like you being like, oh, I should use it. I should use it. Like, cause you won't be able to use the other kind of money. I think until that point, it will remain mainly just a savings instrument for most people. in America. Like now, there are other things that we should touch on that are quite interesting. I think Bitcoin mining is very important, very interesting. So the Navajo are currently mining Bitcoin with solar on their reservations and in their territory, which is really important because they've been totally screwed. They had all their land confiscated, genocided, all that stuff by us, by Americans. So they're now like, wait a second, we have all these resources. Let's put them to work. Let's actually get financial freedom. So this came to light the other day that they were doing it. They were like being quiet about it, but they're like mining Bitcoin with sunlight. They're turning sunlight into hard money that they can then, lift themselves up with. I think that's so awesome. So that's happening. And I think that Bitcoin mining at home is going to become a bigger thing. I think it's not out of the question that within 5 to 10 years, when you go to like a Home Depot or whatever, there'll be like a Bitcoin mining aisle and you'll go, you'll buy your ASIC and you'll plug it in at home. And hopefully you'll have some solar power and you can just earn that way. Maybe our grid system will be much more renewable by then, and you can just plug into your grid, and you want to do that, great. I think that like mining is going to be something that becomes a lot more doable because of ASICs. Like, and most proof of work coins don't have, like, ASICs are so important. The ASIC is important because the life cycle of an ASIC basically starts to get longer and longer due to the Moore's law thing. Like these ASICs now, you can still use an ASIC from like 5 or 6 years ago. It still works. It's not like this thing where you throw it out after 6 months, like it was with CPUs around the turn of 2000, right? It was like they were changing so fast. ASICs have a life cycle of like 4 years, and they're going to get longer because we're like getting to the edge of what's possible with semiconductors, right? So these ASICs, where you can just plug it into the power source of some kind and make money, are going to be, I think, in my opinion, very important freedom tools for people around the world. I mean, you live in Lebanon, you got nothing. Well, maybe you've got solar or like a generator with gasoline or something like that, and you can run a Bitcoin miner. I mean, the options are somewhat dizzying in terms of the mining. So I wouldn't want to leave that out either. I think the mining piece is very, very important.
Is it though? I mean, how much like actual, assuming that substantial numbers of people all plugged in ASIC miners, the chance that anyone is ever going to actually successfully mine a block is quite low at that point, isn't it?
No. Okay, right. That's a great point. That's why nobody, unless you're like a massive industrial organization.
So you're gonna have to subscribe to a network or something, I assume.
Yeah, it's called a mining pool. Yeah, and it's done quite in a. It can even be done in a pretty trustless way, essentially. But like, you get whatever you put in. So whatever amount of work you put in, whenever the pool mines a block, you get the mathematical percentage of that. And
Gotcha.
Today, just to give your listeners an idea, today it's more profitable to mine at home on your grid than to buy at an exchange. If you look at like the kilowatt hour price of energy versus what you make just with one miner at home today, you make almost double your money. So like, and we'll see. I mean, that relates to the fact that we're kind of in a bull market now. There's reasons for that, but like at the moment, as we speak, mining at home is profitable. It's a way to get like non KYC Bitcoin, like that it's up to you to declare to whomever, wherever you live. And maybe that sounds sketchy to an American, but for most people in this world, that's not sketchy. That's important, actually, to have money that the government doesn't know about. So it all depends on the eye of the beholder kind of thing. But I think Bitcoin mining at home is going to be interesting. I mean, the network doesn't need it. Like big industrial mining operations power the vast majority of the network. It's not a security issue.
Right.
I'm just saying it's an interesting like thing that I think will start to become a thing, like more hobbyist stuff. Like people love working on their cars and stuff like that. They're going to like working on their Bitcoin mining stuff too. It's going to become like a bigger hobby, in my opinion, as is like it took me years kind of to figure out how to run my own Bitcoin server. And like these things they're getting so much easier over time though.
Right.
Like you're starting to get like plug and play options for running your own Bitcoin server. It's like amazing. You can order it offline. It comes the next day, and it's like you plug it in. You're a full sovereign Bitcoin individual. It's truly amazing. So, in terms of the vulnerabilities and like what I hope Bitcoin can do better in the future, privacy is definitely one. There's still some privacy vulnerabilities in Bitcoin. but there's a lot of work being done to like improve that.
And by that you mean, like,
yeah,
for example, in some of these countries, what you're talking about when you say privacy, you mean that people are doing transactions that they do not want the government to necessarily know about for one reason or another, and those transactions are obviously able to be viewed if the government can unmask who that address was or
yeah,
something like this, or
yeah, like location agnostic. Let's say you're in America, and you buy you like give all this identification documents to Coinbase, and you buy like $10 of Bitcoin there,
yeah,
and then you move that off onto your own wallet. Currently, if it's like the base layer technology, just normal Bitcoin,
yes,
Coinbase knows
yes,
reasonably surely. Now you could have like paid somebody, like
right,
they don't know for sure, but they could like in a court of law, they would probably say, yeah, that's Alex's Bitcoin.
yeah,
And then people can follow it,
right,
right?
right,
So you could obviously see why that'd be bad for dissidents.
right,
Now,
yes,
what is already possible today is a bevy of technology that basically makes that not very hard, not easy to do. So there's something called a coin join or a collaborative spend. So let's say I pull my money off Coinbase. Coinbase knows I have it. Then I enter a spend with 100 other people. And then what it does is like we all have different amounts coming in,
mm-hmm.
but on the other end, it's all equal output. So that like no one knows who's who. So like you've defeated that. And the really interesting thing is going to be the Lightning Network. So exchanges are now adding it. So Lightning Network isn't on the blockchain.
Right.
It's a second layer technology. So you can withdraw your Bitcoin on the Lightning Network, and then you can't follow it like in the same way. So what I'm saying is like there's improvements coming on that front. I mean, when I say improvements, I'm coming from the perspective of someone who wants Bitcoin to be exactly like digital cash, meaning have the same attributes as cash, in as much as when I pay you with this cash, you don't know my name, you don't know my address, you don't know what the thing I last bought is, you can't cancel my next payment, you're just going to take it and leave. And that's morally the standard of our country, and that's what we grew up doing. Now this new like normal of like every time I swipe to buy something, this like vast army of third parties knows, surveillance capitalism nonsense. So we want to get like people like me want to get back to like when I pay you, that's it. That's like all like, you want to like know my name? Great, then I have to give it to you, but the money's not going to give it to you. That's what we want to get back to. And then the second thing would just be in today's world, Bitcoin is too volatile for most people. Like, just to be honest, there's like
right. Yeah, certainly.
It's just yeah. I mean, certainly, it's a great savings technology. That's indisputable. But it is for a lot of people. Like, look, if you are all in on Bitcoin, it doesn't matter as much. But like, what would be useful, and this is why we have stable coins, is there was that like use case for a crypto asset that mirrored the dollar, right? That was like very important for trading and all sorts of stuff, right? And now as we see, like even people in like Lebanon use Tether quite a bit, right? So there's like a need for like digital dollars in this sense, right? So what's going to happen over the next 2-3 years in Bitcoin, I believe from what I'm seeing, is the ability like to download your own Bitcoin wallet on a phone, like non-custodial, like no KYC, like it's just open software.
Which seems like a pretty important part of this puzzle, because based on everything you said, like if we want to actually realize these gains,
you got to be your own bank.
You kind of have to start with the premise that people will be able to secure their own Bitcoin.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's a challenge. But the point is like you'll be able to have this wallet, and you'll be able to basically choose to like peg some value of your Bitcoin to the dollar through basically something called contract for difference. What that means is like in that ecosystem of people in that wallet, there'll be some people who are on the back end short Bitcoin and some people who are long Bitcoin. So what that means is like, let's say you sent me $100 of Bitcoin today. In a few years, I'll be able to just in my wallet, without any connection to the banking system, peg half of it to USD. And that way I have $50 and the other is floating. Okay. So that's coming. That's going to be really disruptive and really exciting, because that's like the bridge we need to go into the future, is the ability for Bitcoin users to in a self-custodial way peg some of their value to fiat currency.
So this is basically like an integrated forex, basically, for Bitcoin,
yeah,
where different people are saying, this is what I want to do, and somehow it will find people who want the opposing side of that trade.
Yeah, it's a marketplace, right? But the wallet doesn't show you the marketplace, it just shows you your value.
Right.
Like there's something happening on the back end, and it could be done with any fiat currency.
Right.
But like 99% of all stablecoins are dollars.
Right.
Like stablecoins are an extension of the dollar system, which is interesting. But like they actually strengthen the dollar's global network effect. So, but I think that this is coming. So those are the two things I'm most looking out for. The other thing is already here, which is tip jars. For a long time, like it was bad for private, it's bad for privacy for you to put a Bitcoin address on your website, because as I was explaining, that means like you can start de-anonymizing everybody, right? So what you really want is like a Lightning feature where people can tip you in Lightning. Now, this for a long time was like not possible because Lightning was like clunky and just being born, and it needed this like invoice system, and it wasn't great at this. But it's improving, like all software does, and now it's to the point where you can just have a static QR code and anyone can just like scan it and send you any amount of Lightning. It's amazing. So this is called offers, and they're not like where they need to be. They're brand new, but over the next year or two, like any Bitcoin app, like you'll be able to, like where you have $100 of Bitcoin or whatever in your wallet, you'll be able to like print from your wallet a QR that you can pin to your IG page or pin to your Patreon or whatever, or print out and put on your store. And people can just pay directly like that with Lightning. And it's like digital cash. It's not trackable. So that to me is really exciting. So there's lots going on, man. Lots in the Bitcoin space.
Okay, so I think so I guess we probably covered most of the questions that I actually have about sort of like what I wanted to ask you about, but I guess I wanted to end with something maybe a little more open-ended, which is just to say, if I wanted to go look at an actual Bitcoin ecosystem that is perhaps the most representative of positive effects in countries that don't have a stable or pseudo-stable financial system to fall back on, where would you recommend? Like, you mentioned a bunch of different places, and it seems like maybe El Salvador isn't the best example because the government there is sort of now getting into it as well. So maybe could you give?
They also use dollars. They're a dollarized country.
So could you give an example of like, here's the place I would recommend people look at, and maybe what they could go read about to understand like specifics on the ground in practice, how this is helping, or how it's not working as optimally as it could for there, and what they would need to make it work optimally, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, look, to get a glimpse of what I think could be the future, I still think it's important. I'll give you two examples, but the first one would be this town in El Salvador, because it's just amazing to be there and to be able to do everything you need just with Lightning. Like you start to realize how possible it is, and how elegant it is, and how easy it is, and how much it matters when you pay somebody in Lightning. Like with Bitcoin, it's different than paying them in dollars. It's almost like a deeper human connection. It's like more serious than dollars. It's like something that could be an investment. So going to El Zante and experiencing it is very powerful. I mean, it's psychologically, it's very interesting.
But wait, why is it? I don't understand. I guess I don't understand that part.
Sure.
Why would it be like? Why is it psychologically any different from paying them in anything else? Is it just because Bitcoin is kind of new? So because you are both Bitcoin users, there's a bit of a shared like this is the future feeling, or is it something else?
No, I mean, it's because Bitcoin has a annual growth rate of 200%, and like when you pay someone in Bitcoin, it's like more skin in the game than paying them with dollars. Like it's
so
more serious.
It's because of the current appreciation rate of the asset is high, therefore.
The historic appreciation rate of this thing is high, and it's very dear. It's dear money. Like it's a big deal to pay somebody a Bitcoin. Like it's something that's quite like a statement. And I think that it's just really, really like just more meaningful. But it's hard to explain. Like you actually have to go do it, and you'll start understanding when you actually spend it. What was interesting is like most people who use Bitcoin have never spent Bitcoin. Like most people who use Bitcoin only use it for the savings aspect, the overwhelming majority. Okay?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Yeah, like there's not a lot of places here that you could go and buy something in Bitcoin directly. At least I can't think of a place I could go here.
Yeah, it's going to change. Yep, that's changing. But yes, you're correct. Yeah, that was like an early dream that didn't work out. But it's going to, because you need Lightning. I mean, honestly,
right, sure.
If Lightning didn't exist, the whole thing would not work.
Right.
Like, with the payments. Like you don't want to wait 10 minutes. Like it has to be instant. It has to be better than the legacy system. I mean, if you want to actually see how people are like using Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies more broadly, like because the existing system has failed, you would go to Lagos, you'd go to Nigeria, you would go there, you would meet up with the local scene. You would see what people do. You would see how people are completely independent from the banking system. You would see how they earn in Bitcoin, how they spend in Bitcoin, how they connect with their families abroad in Bitcoin. That's where you would go. I mean, to me, that's like the capital of Bitcoin. It's like Lagos.
And are there good resources for reading about that for people such as myself who don't really have the opportunity of going anywhere, but we just have to read something? Is that something I could find information about online, for example,
Yeah,
or not really?
yeah, I would say it's been ignored by the mainstream media. So
Well,
it's like it's
shocking.
not. Yeah, no, there's a couple good Reuters. If you just type like Nigeria Bitcoin adoption, you'll find some good stuff. And like Reuters had a piece. I tried to interview. Well, I didn't try. I interviewed one of the prominent people who run a Bitcoin company there. Her name is Ira. I did a profile of her. It's an article called "Check Your Financial Privilege."
Okay.
And I'd recommend that one if people are interested. I also interview people from Sudan and Ethiopia who are using Bitcoin there, and like I'm kind of trying to get at like why are you doing this? Like,
Oh,
it seems
okay.
weird. So that was my quest, was to like try and explain to the reader why these people are doing this. So that might be helpful as a resource. Check Your Financial Privilege. But yeah, there was something in the Guardian the other day. There's some good stuff coming out on like how the legacy financial media, they're finally coming to grips with like that this thing has a use case. Like it took them about 10 years. Like everybody's just heard from the government and from the media that Bitcoin is like dangerous and risky and whatever. And it's like, the crazy part is it was dangerous and risky to not have Bitcoin. Like that's the reality. I mean,
Okay.
it's true. I mean, it's you and I laugh about it because it's funny, but like, it's not funny for someone in Lebanon or
Yeah.
Venezuela. Like it's everything got taken from them. So,
Well, I remember seeing a long time ago pictures of Zimbabwe where people were literally carrying mountains of cash
yeah,
to pay for small items. So, like, I remember being like, yeah, hyperinflation is a very, very, very dangerous thing, to say the
yeah,
least.
and if it's not even like but it's also just, again, remember 1.6 billion people live under
Yeah.
double or triple digit. Like it's
Yeah.
hyperinflation is one thing, and I know that like we have to be like, oh, it has to be like a certain like what hyperinflation really means to me is just extreme inflate, like noticeable inflation.
Yes.
Like where you're like, oh my god, I'm like,
Yeah.
in a matter of months, my money's
Right.
buying me
Right.
less.
You can't really save.
Yeah, and like economists have tried to like gatekeep it as like 50% per month or something like that. I don't buy that. I think it's just we can even dispense with the term. The point is that like extreme inflation is rampant in the globe today. It just is. Let's put it this way: more people suffer under double-digit inflation than who don't have access to a toilet or who live in abject poverty.
Right.
It
Right.
is a larger human problem than either of those two.
And so I guess the last thing I would ask is, I mean, obviously, if there's anything else you want to talk about, we could talk about that too. But I had one final thing that we didn't really touch on, and that's just this entire time we've talked about Bitcoin and, of course, the Lightning Network, which runs on top of Bitcoin. Do you have opinions related to this kind of work and these kind of benefits as far as other coins are concerned? Do you see them as superfluous, or are they worth doing, or do you have any opinions about the fact that obviously because Bitcoin started to gain some traction, there have been many people who have tried making their own versions, some of them successful, some of them not, at like getting people's interest. Any thoughts on that with respect to this, or not really?
Well, I hope the audience has. I mean, I've tried to talk quite a bit about stablecoins and about Tether throughout this conversation. And I think there's a clear, demonstrable desire from the world to have dollar assets that are beyond the control.
Sorry,
of
I meant not something that's pegged, but another cryptocurrency store of hard asset store, like you talked about with
no. Like for me, I'm like it's Bitcoin, and then stablecoins are the second most interesting thing in this field for me. And nothing else is really that relevant.
Okay.
From a savings perspective.
Okay.
I mean, like in a bull market, the altcoins will absolutely outcompete Bitcoin in a short window.
Right.
You're seeing this like Solana,
right,
which is this like totally centralized corporate corporately issued stock, essentially, of that's unregulated.
Right.
It's gone up 200x since January.
Right.
I mean, Bitcoin's up like 2x.
Right.
So it's like they're not comparable. But what ends up happening is that in the crypto markets, we have cycles, and the bull cycle is a lot of fun for people. Yeah, the bear cycle is pretty brutal.
Right.
So what ends up happening is all these other tokens, which are largely held by a small group of people, they just get washed out, and they lose like 90 to 95% of their value. So everybody's partying right now, but we'll see about what happens later. And that's why, like, so this Bitcoin thing is like a long-term thinking, like over time, it grows and grows and grows in value. These other things will come and go. I mean, again, they're kind of like an R&D lab in some ways. Like, there's some stuff happening with some other coins that I think, is going to come to Bitcoin. Like this idea that I mentioned of having almost like a 4x inside your wallet.
Yes.
Like, that's already possible in the Ethereum ecosystem. So I think like people should keep their eye out on what's going on in these other systems. But as far as like humanitarian use cases, for me, like the only ones I've really seen are Bitcoin and stable coins.
And that's because Bitcoin, you have a lot more faith that it will be able to retain that, at least not losing value and hopefully appreciating, whereas you think the other coins can't offer that kind of thing.
No. I just was being descriptive. Like, I'm just saying in my work and seeing what are people using around the
They're
world,
not using the other currencies.
Like not as much. I mean,
Gotcha.
It's like Bitcoin is very dominant.
I see.
And stable coins are also used, but it's not like people are using Dogecoin as
right.
No,
I understand.
No,
okay.
No. So these are all the primary use case for all the other altcoins is pure speculation by insiders who have a lot of that token. And that's important to understand, is that all these other currencies can be manipulated quite easily. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, look, you still get the same number of folks. I mean, trading is popular everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why, if you're in Palestine or you're in Nigeria or Vietnam, you're going to want to trade just as much as someone in Wall Street.
Gotcha.
Like, guess what? You can't trade in Wall Street because there's a gate. You're not allowed. But you can trade on Binance. So, like, that explains, I think, a lot of the bulk of that activity is people who have that desire to trade, and to see if they can make a quick buck, But it doesn't end well for most people. Like that road is tough. Like, it's kind of like being in Vegas, like the dealer always wins kind of thing. Like,
yeah, I'm sure.
Like, and if you're not if you don't know who the sucker is, you're the sucker. Like, that's kind of how it is in these things. And we'll see. Some people are able to make money and others aren't, but it's almost like a different kind of conversation. I think it's less on the humanitarian side, so that's why I continue to focus on Bitcoin and on its technology, Lightning and things like that. And then I'm also paying attention to stable coins because I've seen them being used, like, it is what it is.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Did you have anything else that you wanted to say to the folks watching that we didn't cover on? Anything that important that you think I didn't ask about?
No, I think you were great. I think we covered a lot of ground. I just would encourage you to, if you're listening, to just put yourself in the shoes of somebody else, who maybe isn't as lucky as you with regard to the money you were born with and the systems you have access to. And it may not make sense for you at the moment. Like, it may be like, why would I have a use case for that? But like, so many people out there just like don't have the same like financial tools as you. So that's why it's important. And regardless of who you are, I think it's important. Like, this thing has outcompeted all of the things that you own, whoever you are listening, over the last 10 years. And it's probably going to outcompete them over the next decade too. So it doesn't matter like how privileged you are. Like, you're probably going to want to pay attention to this thing. Like, is my general.
Well, in reading between the lines of some of the early things you said, it sort of sounds like you think people are going to start being deprivileged a little bit by U.S. inflation as well.
Well, I mean, yeah, 6% is 6%.
Yep.
It's a lot. I mean, we'll see where we go from here. Maybe it's all transitory,
but
it's not transitory for people in many places around the world. So it's a permanent phenomenon of their life. So anyway, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for talking with us. And I will. Could you give your Twitter handle as well, or where you might want people to look you up if they want to follow you?
Yeah, my DMs are open at Gladstein, Gladstein, and you can also check out the work of the organization I work for the Human Rights Foundation at href.org. Thanks again.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Yep. Take care.